Welcome to the Social Podcast, brought to you by Another World Media and F the Box Movement. It's time for real talk with real people. Are you ready? Let's go.
Thank you for joining us. You are listening to the Social Podcast. I am your host, Mona Cedillo. This was a situation that actually happened in personal life between me and our guest. I felt like it was a really good teachable moment for both of us. And so thankfully she agreed to come on and we're going to have a discussion. Everyone welcome my guest. Her name is Jodi Gersh and she's with Colorado Public Radio. I'm really excited.
I wish that the situation that occurred that led to me being here didn't happen, but I am glad to be here and talk to you about it.
Yeah, well, and I think it's important because when I first reached out and I asked, hey, why don't you come on the podcast and let's talk about it? And you said, no, I don't think it's really, that much. And I said, oh, you'd be surprised.
Yeah. And it's funny, you don't know this, but I started out in social media, early days of social media in the 2009, 2010. And in the beginning days, there were lots of errors and issues and people posting things that, mistakenly off the wrong accounts. I think this is an interesting story about how this all happened. And I look forward to getting into it with you.
Okay. So for our listeners, Jodi is with CPR and you are Senior VP of...
I head up a group called Audience and Platforms, and it's basically a division that includes marketing, communications, and digital products and platforms. Mm-hmm. And so I'm speaking to you today sort of on the corporate communications kind of side of things and the marketing side, because I think that you're absolutely right that any organization that does any kind of social or marketing, that this is probably a story that would be of interest.
Absolutely. So for our listeners, I'll share a little bit about what happened. So basically there was an ad for CPR and I believe it was trying to get members. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I have a copy of the ad in front of me. I can read it.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
That's helpful. So it's an ad that came from Colorado Public Radio, and it said, "We truly believe in building local communities and grounding us all in shared experiences. Explore content tailored to your neighborhood on your customized community page." And the idea behind this was exactly what you're saying. These ads were kind of targeted to different locations because somebody had built these customized pages that had stories from different regions within the state of Colorado. It really was just about trying to kind of curate a certain experience on different pages and then try to promote that to people that maybe weren't familiar with CPR or didn't realize that CPR covered the Front Range or, Grand Junction and Western Slope and Colorado Springs, et cetera. So that's the idea behind it.
Yes. Yes. Okay. And so this is where I come in. So the problem that I was having was that the picture that was used for the ad was a picture of Soul Tribe, the tattoo shop I live in the Baker neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And so I'm actually, I friends with a lot of Chicanos, a lot of indigenous people around here. And so the picture though was of Soul Tribe, and it was during a time of mourning. Mm-hmm. And so it had a lot of our neighborhoods and friends standing around, and you could see the flowers, you could see the candles. And me, myself, I was just really offended. I was hurt. And I was just like, wow, that's a very tender, like a lot of us are still grieving and missing Alicia and, and her daughter. Mm-hmm. And so it was just, I thought it was a really poor taste.
Absolutely. I was just saying, and what was in the post didn't even really go with the photo. I mean, the post, the content, the copy in that post was really just very generic. Mm-hmm. And so to use a photo like that, and to make matters worse, below it, the headline was "Sign up to get a free CPR decal," which is just like throwing more. It just is awful.
That's why I said something and I tagged people because I wasn't sure, was this intentional? Was this an accident? I don't know. But, obviously I said something on social media, and of course, a good number of people said, yeah, I'm really surprised. And I said, and that was the big thing for me too, was I listened to CPR. I appreciate it. It's probably the radio station I listen to half the time, honestly. I was really shocked and I was disappointed. I mean, I just had all these different emotions.
Yeah.
And of course there was a couple of, friends that are not of color that were just dismissing it. Oh, just leave it alone. It's no big deal. And of course, those of us that know Alicia and those of us that are Indigenous and deal with being tokenized, we were just like, no, like, you don't understand. Like, this is CPR. Like, what is going on?
Especially, I don't know if you are familiar with Shakia Wedgeworth Hollowell, but she's been interviewing and speaking with a lot of the people in your community and the people around the shootings that happened related to suicide, and have been building those relationships. So that just makes it even worse because it just is so tone deaf. So let me tell you what happened.
Yes. Well, really quick before you do, I wanted to share with the listeners that this is the difference right here, is that I posted that. Jodi reached out to me. I don't know if it was that day or the very next day.
I think it was the next morning because honestly, we were still trying to figure out what happened.
What happened, yeah. But this is the difference, though. And the first thing I thought is it's going to be another person saying, don't make it such a big deal. But it was the opposite. Instead, it was you saying, yeah, I agree. That was in poor taste. And there's a reason why. And can we talk about it? Yeah. And I was super impressed.
Yeah, that's obviously not, I didn't do it for that reason. I did it because it was in poor taste. And, I saw your post and I felt that I should explain what happened because that is definitely not how CPR operates.
Right. And I'm telling you right now, as a person, coming from a person of color, that's huge because there's so many companies, whether it be a radio ad or a TV ad or whatever, that use our culture in some sort of fashion, just really exploitive. Yeah. And when we come forward and say, hey, that's really hurtful, that's really not cool, most of the time, my experience is that's the way it is. Yeah, I'm not going to change the name of my company. That's just, we've been like this since 1982 and we're not going to change it. I mean, that's what I'm used to be honest. I'm used to getting kickback about people saying, stop being so sensitive. One, it was CPR, again, like I said, that I really appreciate. And then two, just that you reached out to me personally. I mean, and that's why I want to have this talk, because honestly, like, I wish every company would respond this way, or organization, instead of this knee-jerk defense, to actually be open and teachable. So go ahead, take it from here, Jodi.
Yeah, and I was going to say, we working really hard to be more transparent in every way, and I've always operated that way, sometimes to a fault. And so, I'll go as far as to say that I reached out to just let the CEO know that this had happened, and I'm not going to curse on your podcast, but he said we need to own up to the fact that we effed up. And I was like, I agree. And I'm glad that I have your support. So, so it does come from the top down in acknowledging, when something is in, I mean, even saying it's in poor taste doesn't really capture it, but okay. So you shared the ad and you commented, and I'll read your comment if that's okay with you.
Yes.
So you said, I'm usually down with CPR, but using a photo of Soul Tribe custom tattoo and body piercing and with our community in mourning is not acceptable. Colorado Public Radio, do better. Which you're right. And somebody screen grabbed that and put it in our Slack channel and said, who's aware of this? And so I was made aware of it. I'm not exactly sure what time you did it, but I was made aware of it Thursday, probably around 5:15 p.m. And I immediately shot off a bunch of emails to the different groups that I thought might be responsible for it. And I'll get into who was, and then I waited a few minutes because the emails that I sent were like, we got to pull this down. We got to pull this campaign. Like, we can figure out what happened later, but let's, pull this content. And then I sat around waiting and I was like, you know what? I don't know if they're going to respond right away. It's after 5 p.m. I don't know if anyone's going to see my email. And I just kind of said, screw it. And I went into our Facebook ad manager. Unfortunately, I had access to the campaign that this group was running and I just pulled it. And that was probably around 5:30, 5:45. So from the time that I was aware, from the time that we were aware, it wasn't too long that it was up. But in all fairness, the campaign had been running for 2 days prior to you commenting and me even knowing about it.
Right.
So your comment and someone sharing that with me was the first time I actually saw that ad.
Okay.
And so I'll tell you how it came to be. And again, I want to make it clear that this is not an excuse. It was definitely a horrible error. And there were multiple points where this could have been avoided, but weren't. And, I think in my message to you, I said that we're reviewing all these processes, and I'll talk about some of the things we're going to be changing.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody at CPR was curating that webpage that I was talking about. So the copy of that ad that mentioned a community page. They were pulling together impactful stories that we'd done over the last year to show our donors like the breadth of the work that our journalists do, and to also, show potentially new members and donors that we cover all these different communities. So along with the stories, they also were pulling some photos, and an early draft of one of those pages had that Soul Tribe Vigil photo on it. The person that was curating it asked somebody on my team in communications to proofread the page. And when they saw that photo, they immediately said, you have to pull that photo down. We shouldn't use a tragedy to promote the work we do, and so it was immediately removed from the page. But unfortunately, we work with an agency that specializes in these social appeals to donors. They're not a local agency. I don't even know if they're national, but they're used by a lot of public media, public radio, public TV, specifically to run campaigns to appeal to donors. And so they, from what I've pieced together, they were told they could use any image that was on the page. And that must have happened before my team had proofread the page and pulled that image off. So the points of failure here, in my mind anyway, is that one, that photo should never have been included. And the person curating the page had just kind of gone into the CMS, our content system, and was just looking at photos that our photographers had taken. Wasn't really looking at context, wasn't really looking at the bylines or the descriptions of what the photo represent. They were just looking for photos that captured kind of the feel of what they wanted. And so I don't know that they even knew what was in that photo. I think they just saw a bunch of people in a community standing in front of a storefront. I think that's as far as that kind of thought process might have gone. And this isn't somebody in news, to be clear, because the news department would have known right away what that was. So I think that the first thing is the photo shouldn't have been on that page. Second, and we've determined this is a huge point of failure, nobody from CPR reviews the final images and copy before those campaigns are launched by the agency. And third, and this is just for anybody really that works for a news organization, a news photo really should never be separated from a news story, because it really removes all the context. And some photos, you might see a photo and not see the description of what it is. And for you had a visceral reaction to it because you knew what it was, and you were having those feelings. You experienced that tragedy and that loss. And so, but the agency, again, sometimes you have to use agencies. They are not local, and they would not have known what that photo was because we separated from the story. So multiple points of failure. But the things that we're going to change for the future, obviously, it's kind of a no-brainer that somebody from CPR should always review and approve the posts before the campaigns launch. Yeah. That, when you talk about a teachable moment, obviously, it's embarrassing that we weren't doing that. And I think that, the copy, they say, oh, this is the general copy of the campaign. Great. Here are the photos you can use. But we never actually look at, before the campaign launches, look at what the campaign's going to look like. So that's going to change as of right now. In fact, we've pulled the whole social campaign, and they're rethinking all of it. And there weren't that many photos used, actually, which is interesting. Most of the campaign was illustrations, custom illustrations that had been done. There were just a handful of photos. And so my hope is, and I can't get an exact number, but my hope is not that many people saw it. And because it was a mistake, and the experience that you had when you saw it, I would hope that that was minimized by the fact that the campaign had a lot of different imagery, and so any one particular photo may not have been seen that much, because knowing that that was out there for 2 days is really upsetting.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing that we're going to change is that photos that are taken for news purposes, they really shouldn't be allowed to show up somewhere without some kind of caption. So that the captions, the content, the context stays with those photos that are for news. So I know that your feeling was that, you know, your community was exploited for this, but it honestly, it wasn't. It was more so that a photo that was tied to a really tragic story was pulled and used out of context for marketing, really. Mm-hmm. Which that photo should just never have been in the mix. And we really, you know, throughout the year, my department, the marketing communications, we do look for the photos that our photographers have taken, mm-hmm. but mostly it's of our staff out reporting. You know, if we got a good photo of like one of our journalists, you know, with this microphone interviewing the governor, or somebody, or whatever it might be, we like to collect those photos so that if we do need to use something for marketing, we have great photos of our staff out in the field. We generally don't use news photos of an event, and certainly not a tragedy. It's just bad in many ways. Mm-hmm. So again, not an excuse, but that's what happened.
And, you know, how should I say this? I think about the different, like I said, I had a couple of people telling me to, you know, just let it roll off your shoulder. I did have one good friend that he's actually a really good writer. And he said, you know, I really think that this was an accident. And I said, please tell me that it is, because I said, usually they are one of the groups that are more aware and more sensitive to different social issues. I said, so that was a big part of, probably half of it was
shock.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was.
Yeah.
I was just thinking like, oh no, there are other publications that have obviously, spiraled, and they're not really real news. But for me, CPR was one of the few. And so when that happened, there was a few of us that were just concerned, you know, what is happening? Is CPR going to be like the Denver Post? Like, what's going on?
Well, I won't speak ill of the Denver Post, but I will say, I mean, it really was just an accident, but yeah. I feel like saying that also diminishes the weight of the particular photo and the context in which it was used. And, you know, that's why I don't want to just kind of brush it under the rug as, oh, they picked a photo and it was a mistake and we won't let it happen again. It affected you, and I'm certain it affected others. And so we have to be better, like what you said in all caps, be better. We do have to be better. I mean, because even though it was a simple mistake, it actually wasn't that simple. There were multiple layers to which it could have been caught. And so it didn't have malintent, but it was absolutely a very inappropriate error.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was why I wanted to have I wanted to record this discussion that we have, because like I said, you know, I have had situations where different companies, for whatever reason, there's this one, I think she's a stylist, either a hairstylist or a beautician, some sort of makeup artist. But probably a couple of years ago, we had an incident where this woman, and she was very successful. She had shared a picture of her and her fiance or boyfriend at a Halloween party. And she was dressed up like a Indian princess with a bullet wound in the middle of her forehead.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And her boyfriend was a cowboy. And it was all over social media because, you know, she was well known where she was at, and it just went viral. And so, of course, you know, in Indian country, one person knows, we all know. You know?
Yeah.
So one by one, different people start reaching out and sending her messages on her Instagram or emails. But people are reaching out saying, can you please take this down? It's, you know, it's really inappropriate. There's actually an epidemic with missing and murdered Indigenous women. And there's nothing cute about seeing an Indigenous woman with a bullet in the middle of her forehead. Like, this is very triggering. And her response was just, I'm just having fun. It's just fun. It's not real.
There's a lot of that. And it's really unfortunate. I think, obviously in the last few years, people have been a lot more aware of certain plights that they maybe weren't able to internalize previously. And so I think and I hope that some of that is moving in a positive direction, but there are always going to be ignorant people, unfortunately. And, and it's interesting because when I saw this post and what you'd said, and I looked at the photo, obviously I was mortified, but I also was thinking about how, when I was reading all of the stories that CPR and Denverite, which is also a CPR brand, had done about the shootings that had happened, and Alicia Cardenas and Alyssa Gunn Maldonado and the others that were shot, the things that she believed in and supported. And this post and what, it felt like to you, just, felt a little bit like it could have been like just a slap in the face of what that whole tattoo parlor is about and supports. And so that's also why I reached out, because I felt so strongly about, this is just a mistake, but at the same time, it's a bad one.
Right. Well, and I was really, and it took me a minute, because I saw the picture first. I didn't know what the ad was for. I saw the picture, and then I thought, oh, I wonder if they're, maybe they're sharing about they're getting nominated for, great coverage or something. And then when I saw that it was really about, hey, join us. Yeah. And I saw the picture again, for a second, I thought it was just Soul Tribe. And I thought, well, that's kind of crappy. They're using, everybody knows Soul Tribe now. But then I looked more and I saw, the context. I noticed the flowers and I noticed the candles, and I went, that's like,
yeah,
and I instantly went, that's when we were all hurting. Yeah. That was when that picture was taken. And I thought, wow, that's,
and
not only was it in bad taste, but honestly, it was painful, because it reminded us all that remember that day.
What's even worse, and I'm just kind of digging the hole even worse on our end, is that we actually never used that photo in a story because we felt it was a little too triggering, I think. I'm not part of editorial, so I can't say why they did or didn't. But when I went looking around for what story that photo was with, I couldn't find it. And I think it was, they take a bunch of photos and they uploaded them into the system, and then they choose which ones to use with the stories. And I think the person that was curating that page and pulling photos, again, saw a photo of a storefront with a bunch of people hugging and thought, oh, this represents community, which it could if you didn't really know what it was.
I saw the picture and I was like, okay, they're trying to convey that they're about community, but when, like, this specific moment was very painful for our community. And so that's what I kept thinking of, was like, man, we were really on the ground on that, in this moment, in this picture.
I'm glad that you shared it and you commented, and I'm glad that we're able to have this conversation. Points that I made that we're going to change and things that we're going to do differently. But it's also good to just have the conversation to what you were saying. And when I said to you that I didn't know, if I should come on the podcast because I didn't know if the story would be that interesting, I was really thinking about it in the very simple context of, somebody pulled a photo they shouldn't. And I was like, that's not really that exciting of a story. But then I started thinking about what you said. It gives us a chance to have the dialogue and talk about it. And certainly for others that, might be relying on agencies to do their work, might be having people in different departments that don't know context or story behind certain photos or imagery, to really, have that second or third set of eyes, kind of proof anything before it goes out, and make sure that this is also, now I'm just going to go down a rabbit hole, but this is also why diversity in organizations is very important, and having a very diverse team is important to me as well. And certainly in marketing, if you only have a bunch of people that are exactly the same looking at something, they may all sign off on it. And if you have different people in the room, in your organization, all levels of the company, you will learn things and discover things. You will recognize things that might offend certain cultures that you're not a part of, that you should learn and know about. And so, the more that our organization has, and we've been growing and focused on diversity in the last couple of years, but the more that we have people of all different cultures and backgrounds, ethnicities, genders, whatever it is in the room to look at things, the more you don't make mistakes that could offend somebody. And, when people talk about diversity in organizations, a lot of times I think they talk about it because it's the right thing to do, but it also makes your work better. Anyway, I think that if, more people had had a chance to review this, it would have been caught.
No, I mean, and I appreciate the fact that you said that you've had these discussions that going forward, this is what we're going to do different.
Yeah.
It wasn't just our bad and then that's it. It was like our bad and this is what we're doing to make sure we don't do that again. I agree. I mean, what you said, I was just having a conversation with a couple of friends, and we were talking about that whole topic of representation. And we were saying how it's not enough to just hire someone of color, or it's not enough to just hire this person and, give them this job. It's when you're hiring them, you're actually, making a conscious decision that here's this person with a different culture, different beliefs.
Exactly.
And we're going to respect this person, not bring this person on. And guess what? You're going to have to assimilate to everything we are, and we're just going to ignore everything, and like our kids go through it all the time in school. It doesn't matter, whether I hear horror stories about Black kids, Indigenous kids, their hair getting cut. They think this person is, because they're different, that there's something wrong with them. And going back to the situation again, that is something that could have happened. Another situation is there's a company that they name their bikes after different tribes and chiefs and different. And so, this happened a couple of years ago. They'd actually had a conference, they were attending a conference. They had a pop-up booth and they actually had pictures of, Sitting Bull and, like, that was their background. And then they had their bikes with their, Navajo and this and this and that. And so a lot of us reached out and said, hey, this really isn't okay. And their initial reaction was, okay, we'll change the picture, but that's it. Well, can you change the bikes, the names? And they were just they didn't want to do it. They just did not want to do it. And this bike has been named this for this many years, and this is what it's known as.
Yeah, I lived in the Washington, D.C. area for the bulk of my life. And the football team that shall not be named was a huge issue for a very long time. And as many times that it would come up and that we would, not me personally, I mean, I wasn't in an organization that could affect that change, but certainly believed that the name of that team should not be the name of that team. And, the fact that it finally happened.
There are some people that are commenting what I said about, do better. Of course, there's people saying, why are you making this such a big deal? Like, just let it go. Like, just, if you don't like the ad, then guess what? Just don't look at it. Just keep scrolling. And I said, but that's what we keep doing. We just keep, this is what we're told is just don't say anything, just pretend it's okay. But actually saying something, I think, does bring change. And I do believe that there are some people that are willing to be teachable. They are sincere when they say, you know what, I do want to do better. I do want to learn.
Absolutely. I think you're right. And I'm glad that you called it out, because it wasn't so much that you didn't agree with, something that we said. It was that something in this post was was wrong and insulting and exploitative in your mind, and we should have been called out for it. And if other people didn't see it that way, I guess that's their prerogative, but I saw it that way too when you pointed it out. So, and I'm not the only one. I mean, there were quite a few of us scrambling Thursday on late evening calls going, how did this happen? But exactly how did it happen? But I was not the only one. There were quite a few people that were shocked that this could happen. And so it organizationally did not meet our standards whatsoever.
Right. So I wanted to ask, because I know different people commented on that ad too. Why did you choose to reach out to me?
I didn't see any of the comments, and I only saw the screen grab that someone took of your share. They sent me a screen grab of it. And I've been doing Facebook ads and I'm aware of Facebook ads for many years, but I didn't realize that if you stop a campaign, like turn it off, that it actually removes the post. Like, is your share still out there? Because I
haven't seen it. No,
I don't think it's there anymore. And so because I stopped it, I couldn't see any of the comments. I suppose, it wasn't my ad account. Again, it was the agency. So I suppose I could go digging in there and try to find it and see what other comments there were. But I haven't seen those yet. And actually talking to you right now makes me think I probably should try to figure out if there were other comments and who else we could reach out to. I hope I don't have to do a podcast for everybody. I'm just kidding.
No, just me.
But yeah, so that's why I reached out to you. Yours was the only one that I saw.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you because, personally, aside from CPR, you just, again, your response, I really appreciate, and it is refreshing. Is this an approach you've always had, or is this something you just started coming to a few years ago?
So when I said that I've been doing social media for a long time, I actually did a podcast a few years ago called All the Social Ladies. I think that's what it was called. I used to be with Gannett and USA Today, from like 2001 to a long time, let's just say almost 2 decades. And that's when I was in the DC area. And we were there at the start of social media. So when Facebook didn't even have pages yet, and a lot of our newspapers were just creating profiles under their newspapers' names, and Twitter really didn't even exist. And so there were no rules at all. And it was crazy land. And so you can imagine the kinds of issues that we had to deal with back then. And so I was actually one of the people that helped crafted Gannett's first social media policy for the whole organization, spending a lot of time on the differences and nuance between news and editorial and marketing and sales and the different ways that people use social media. Right. And we had, the reason I didn't delete the campaign or stop it in those first 5 minutes was because I had to reach out to the news staff, because this post, although it came from an ad account, it was on the Colorado Public Radio News Facebook page. And I've always been of the approach, and all the policies that I've been involved with, was that you don't just delete a post. You can make a screenshot of it and delete it, and then share the screenshot with context of why you deleted it and apologize or write, what you did wrong or whatever the case may be. But because this was an ad, you couldn't actually see it on the Facebook page. So I was sort of like, I'm not quite sure how we apologize. Because I don't know who's seen it. And so when you ask, has that always been my approach? The approach has always been own up to the mistake. But this type of thing, in my experience, the best thing you can do is immediately own up to it and apologize and be as transparent as you can. So it's always been my policy. I do think it's also CPR's. I've only been with CPR about 2.5 years. Got here just before the pandemic. Lucky me. And so, but I do think that is also Colorado Public Radio's policy. And I think one of the things that we are trying to do is get faster in that transparency, because there are layers. When something goes wrong, there are layers of policy, of of approvals of people that you need to speak to make sure that everyone's on board. And sometimes those layers take time. But what you can do is say, we are aware that something happened, or we're aware that, this error, this mistake, we're trying to figure out what happened and own up to it, but state that, you'll be coming back with with what happened. And so that's also kind of why I didn't reach out to you that first night, because we were still trying to figure out what happened. And we're still kind of digging through, like, to what you just said about other comments. I would say a small percentage of people saw the post. And so do we make it more prevalent in owning up to the mistake? Do we share the post again and say, this happened and we're sorry? Because that just puts that tragedy, that imagery out there even more. And so because it was an ad and because it wasn't seen by a lot of people, we're not doing kind of a public post about it, because we feel that doing that could cause more harm than good. But reaching out to you and now, as I just realized, other people that might have commented, trying to find out who they might have been and reaching out to them, just, letting them know what happened, is something that we can do. So
there are so many different situations of social injustice where, it's taken years for an apology or reversal of something. And just the fact that there was no time wasted. It was like immediately we saw this, we're going to take care of it. Is that something that CPR has always done, or is that just a new tactic that they're doing?
I think that if something is pointed out that's an error or mistake, we address it right away. And I think that's, I think that's also the difference between maybe a news organization versus other types of organizations, where news organizations move fast. They're doing breaking news. They're constantly looking for updates and on their beats and checking social media. And so I think that that just comes a little bit from being a news organization that works faster than maybe like a brand might. And so even though Colorado Public Radio is a large organization and a brand that has multiple services, we're also a news organization. And I think that is a big part of how we think about responding to things like this. And especially, something that is hurtful or can hurt people, you want to address that as quickly as possible, and not let it continue to spread.
Thinking of another situation where probably I would say, I'm not even sure how many, but I just remember that there was a commercial that a lot of people thought was really inappropriate. And people commented on it, but the company itself didn't even acknowledge it, didn't even respond to it, basically just kept running that commercial like it was no big deal.
Let's say we're doing a fundraising campaign and we've got ads out about Colorado Public Radio, donate today. Those comments won't be seen by the people that moderate the Facebook page. And that's a problem, because people might be commenting and saying, oh, I would donate, but that story you did wrongly accused, blah, 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 like whatever it is. And the news staff that moderates the page isn't seeing that because that's an ad. So that's also why we've put all the social ads, because we really want to, from the top down, review, how do we get any ads that we're running to be at the same standards that the editorial and the content that's being moderated is at? And how do we, if we have ads out there, how do we get those links? Like how can the staff moderate those? Because they're just like what you were saying, there could have been a lot of comments on that post, but I would never have seen that. And more importantly, the people that moderate the posts on our Facebook page, the editors, the news audience editors, would never see those either. Because you shared it and somebody must have been friends with you and saw it, or I don't know how it got to me, but that's not good. Like, shouldn't only see it because someone saw your sharing and screenshotted it and sent it to me. Like, there should be a better process for us to moderate comments on a post. And so that's another kind of hiccup in the process that I didn't mention earlier, but why we also pulled all the ads, because we want to review that process and figure out a better way, to have the staff that's more accustomed to talking to our audience, which isn't going to be an agency that's not in Colorado. It's going to be our people.
Right.
How do we get them access to be able to see the conversation happening on those ads?
I mean, it's honestly a full-time job. I worked for a nonprofit a few years ago, and that was part of my job. It wasn't just to post content to the page, but it was actually to monitor the different comments and how people were sharing. Part of my job at that time was, again, just checking the comments, and whenever something was shared, was double checking. Is that share? Is the share in connection with what it's supposed to be for? Because there would be times where maybe an article we shared or a photo we shared, and somebody just, had bad intentions, and they just would share the post and make fun of it.
Right.
And, just something really toxic, some misogynistic, comment or whatever. It would take hours every day.
We have a disconnect. Again, another great learning for us is that disconnect between those campaigns and who's moderating them, which the answer had been nobody. So not only have the disconnect about the imagery and the content, but so we have, we have some definite takeaway. The good news is we can see exactly, what went wrong. And like I said, there were multiple points, and we can address each one and put into place procedures and processes and approvals so that we can hopefully prevent something like that from happening again. Hopefully, this is insider information, but hopefully in my budget to add a position next year that would actually be doing like the digital marketing strategy and doing the ads in-house, so we won't need to use an agency. And that's certainly a goal. Then we own the whole process, and we don't need to have a lot of back and forth and try to figure out what exactly is happening.
Right. And, in the moment, it was teachable for me too, because I got triggered and immediately for a split second was thinking, this is intentional. Like, I can't believe this, like, I'm so tired of this happening to, our people, and why. And my friend, like I said, he's a very well experienced, seasoned writer, editor. And he actually talked me down, and he said, Mona, like, think about who it is. He's like, I really think this is not intentional. And I said, well, you're just saying that because, you're not Indigenous. That's why. And of course, that's far from it. He's a very aware, compassionate person. So it's teachable for me to not just assume and have that knee-jerk reaction, but then it was also teachable to our friends, because he took the chance, he took the risk of saying something, like, Mona, just slow down a second. and people saw that conversation on social media.
It's nice that CPR has the reputation that he and you both were shocked, because you would not expect something like this from CPR. So I guess that's a good thing that we do, have that reputation. But, when you have that kind of reputation, you can't allow something like this to sneak through. And have an error like this. And so I am really glad that we had this conversation today.
Me too. So going forward, you guys are going to be bringing somebody in. I love that, because that was another conversation I was having with friends, was how some of these companies around here, they continue to hire people from out of state that are making decisions that affect us, that we know the community, we know the street, we know this business, we know these people.
Right.
And it becomes a problem.
Yeah. And our staff, I mean, we take seriously that we are Colorado Public Radio, and our staff is almost entirely in Colorado, and the new staff certainly. But again, when you outsource certain things, because either, you're outsourcing it to an organization that specializes in that, and sometimes it makes sense to do certain things like that. Right. But that's where you get into that, if that had been somebody here, they would have most likely recognized that the photo wasn't appropriate to use.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time and being approachable and transparent. And again, I really think this conversation was needed, and I hope it's helpful.
Yeah, me too. Again, I mean, I've said it before. I do apologize. I absolutely could see that it could be triggering, and you've helped me even think about that. There may have been other people that have commented on the post that I should probably dig into and reach out to, because they should also know what happened and that it was not intentional. So thank you also for having this conversation and for being open to hearing what happened. The fact that it wasn't malintent. It was just a series of mistakes.
Well, and I think that's a part of community, is having some understanding and giving each other grace when it's genuine,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Again, thank you very much. And it was nice meeting you, and hopefully maybe I'll meet you in person sometime soon.
Oh yeah. Always happens. And then usually we don't recognize each other.
That's right. Thank you so much,
All right.
Mona.
You're very welcome. Everyone, this was Jodi with the CPR. You've been listening to the Social Podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to be a part of this conversation. And until next time, be good to each other.